December 26th, 2004. The Indian Ocean was calm that morning. Fishermen went out as usual. Families walked beaches. Children played near the shore. And then, without warning, the earth moved. A massive undersea earthquake, magnitude 9.1, one of the strongest ever recorded. Within minutes, waves taller than buildings hit coastlines across 14 countries. More than 230,000 people died. No villain, no moral intention, no punishment, no justice. Just nature. Indifferent. That day, many people asked the same question humanity has asked for thousands of years. Why? Why would this happen? Why them? Why now? Why innocent people? Why children? Religion struggled. Politics stayed silent. Science explained how, but not meaning. And Nietzsche would quietly whisper something uncomfortable. The universe does not care about your ideas of good and evil. That's not cruelty. That's honesty. Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't trying to destroy morality. He was asking something far more dangerous. What if our ideas of good and evil are not universal truths, but human inventions? What if morality didn't come from the universe, but from fear, survival, power, weakness, and history? That tsunami didn't ask who was good. It didn't spare the kind. It didn't punish the cruel. It just was. And Nietzsche says, before you judge reality, ask who taught you how to judge. Beyond Good and Evil isn't a book you read. It's a book that questions you. It asks, who decided what is moral? Who benefits from these values? Are your beliefs chosen or inherited? Are you thinking or obeying? Most people never ask these questions because certainty feels safe. Morality feels comforting. Rules feel stabilizing. Labels feel necessary. But Nietzsche says comfort can be a cage. Long before philosophy, there was biology. Tribes, survival, strength, fear. Early humans didn't ask what is good. They asked what keeps us alive. What protects the group? What punishes threats? What controls behavior? Nietzsche argues that morality evolved the same way instincts did, not from truth, but from necessity. And later, those survival rules were turned into divine commands, moral laws, absolute truths. What if morality isn't sacred, but strategic? Nietzsche introduces a disturbing idea that much of what we call good was defined by the weak, not the strong. Humility, obedience, self-denial, guilt, sacrifice. Beautiful values, but also useful tools for controlling power. And traits like strength, pride, ambition, individuality, labeled as evil. Nietzsche asks, what if morality was shaped not by truth, but from resentment? Look around today. Social media outrage, moral signaling, cancel culture, ideological wars, us versus them. Everyone is certain they're good. Everyone is sure the other side is evil. Nietzsche would smile sadly and say, the most dangerous people are those who believe they are morally right, because they stop questioning themselves. This series is not about becoming amoral. It's about becoming honest. Honest about where values come from, why we believe what we believe, how power, fear, biology, and history shape morality, and whether we are living consciously or inherited scripts. This is not a comfortable book. It was never meant to be. It was meant to wake you up, to push you beyond easy labels, beyond borrowed beliefs, beyond moral autopilot. So, my friend, before we begin, ask yourself one quiet question. Are my values truly mine, or were they handed to me by a world that never asked my consent? Sit back. Take a breath. You're listening to Wise Alchemy. Let me start with something uncomfortable. Most of us grow up believing that good and evil are obvious, that they're written somewhere in the universe, that they're permanent, that they're safe. Good people do this, bad people do that. Simple. Nietzsche would laugh at this simplicity, not because he was cruel, but because he thought it was dangerous. Nietzsche's first punch to the reader is this: morality did not fall from the sky. It was built by humans. Good and evil are not cosmic facts like gravity. They are human inventions shaped by fear, survival, power, and history. Ask yourself honestly, my friend, why is humility good? Why is ambition suspicious? Why is obedience praised? Why is dominance feared? These values didn't come from truth. They came from social need. Morality was a tool long before it was a belief. Here's something Nietzsche understood deeply. Humans cannot tolerate uncertainty for long. Not knowing what's right or wrong feels terrifying. So, we simplify. We draw lines. We label. We categorize. Good, evil. Pure, corrupt. Us, them. Saint, sinner. These labels calm us. Morality is often less about truth and more about emotional comfort. If I know I'm good, I don't have to question myself. If I know you're evil, I don't have to understand you. Certainty feels safe, but safety is not truth. Nietzsche noticed something disturbing. Once morality is accepted as absolute, it becomes a weapon. People don't argue anymore, they accuse. They don't understand, they condemn. They don't question, they punish. History is full of people convinced they were good while doing horrific things. Crusades, inquisitions, witch hunts, moral purges. Modern cancel culture. Different centuries, same mechanism. Moral certainty removes responsibility. If you believe you are unquestionably right, anything becomes justified. That should scare us. Nietzsche asks us to look deeper. Who benefits when certain values are called good? Often, those already in power, or those too weak to change their position. Calling strength evil and weakness good is not morality, it's strategy. This doesn't mean strength is always right or weakness is always wrong. It means values are contextual, not sacred. They evolve with biology, society, and power dynamics. Here's the lie Nietzsche wants to destroy in Chapter 1. Our moral values are neutral and universal. No, my friend. They are historical, psychological, and biological. They reflect who had power, who didn't, who feared whom, who survived. Morality tells a story, not about God or truth, but about human struggle. And the moment you realize this, you stop seeing morality as holy law and start seeing it as a living experiment. Nietzsche isn't asking you to become amoral. He's asking you to become honest. To question why you feel guilt, why you feel pride, why certain desires scare you, why certain rules feel natural. What if some of your shame was inherited, not earned? What if some of your goodness was conditioning, not choice? That's where freedom begins, not in rebellion, but in awareness. My friend, beyond good and evil does not mean chaos. It means courage. The courage to ask who decided this was right, who benefits if I obey, What part of me is being suppressed? And most importantly, what kind of human could I become if I stopped hiding behind moral labels? Once you accept that morality was created and not discovered, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who created it, and why? Because moral systems don't appear in a vacuum. They are born in blood, hunger, fear, and survival. Let's go back, far back, before philosophy books, before religion as we know it, before laws were written. In the earliest human societies, morality had nothing to do with kindness or fairness. It had one job: keep the group alive. If something helped the tribe survive, it was good. If something threatened survival, it was bad. That's it. No universal truth, no moral absolutes, just survival logic. Stealing food from another tribe? Bad for them, good for you. Killing an enemy? Bad if you are the one dying, good if you're the one standing. Morality was local, situational, and practical. Now look at ancient warrior societies. Think of early Indo-European tribes. Think of Sparta. Think of Viking culture. In these worlds, morality looked very different from what we call good today. Strength was good. Courage was good. Dominance was good. Pity? Weakness. Humility? Suspicious. Obedience? For the defeated. A strong warrior who conquered was admired. A weak man who failed was despised. Does that sound cruel? Yes, but it made sense in that environment. When survival depends on strength, morality rewards strength. Now something interesting happens. As societies grow larger, not everyone can be a warrior. Power begins to shift. Those without physical strength discover a different weapon: meaning, narrative, morality itself. This is where Nietzsche becomes dangerous, because he says when priestly classes gained influence, morality changed direction. Suddenly, strength became brutality, pride became sin, power became corruption, submission became virtue, suffering became holy. Morality flipped, not because truth was discovered, but because power structures changed. Nietzsche loved ancient Greece for a reason. Greek morality wasn't obsessed with guilt. It admired excellence, arete, becoming great, fulfilling one's nature. The Greeks asked, what can a human become? Priestly morality asked, what must a human suppress? That difference matters. One celebrates life, the other disciplines it. My friend, this is not history trivia. This is the foundation of how you still judge yourself today. Here's the uncomfortable insight Nietzsche forces on us. Morality is a strategy for organizing humans. It tells people who should obey, who should lead, who should feel guilty, who should feel righteous. And once a moral system takes hold, it presents itself as eternal truth, not as a strategy. That's the real deception. Imagine if traffic laws claimed they were written by the universe itself. Absurd, right? But moral laws do exactly that. Modern humans like to think we're beyond this. We're not. We inherit moral instincts without questioning where they came from. Why do you feel guilty for wanting more? Why does ambition sometimes feel wrong? Why does strength feel suspicious? Why is suffering often praised more than joy? These feelings didn't come from nature. They came from historical power shifts. And once morality is internalized, you don't need chains anymore. You police yourself. Have you ever felt ashamed for a desire that didn't actually hurt anyone? Have you ever felt guilty for wanting power, success, independence, intensity? That guilt didn't come from truth. It came from history. So now we know two things. 1. Morality was created, not discovered. 2. Different groups shaped morality to survive and rule, which leads to the next, far more unsettling question. What happens when morality turns inward and becomes a weapon against the self? That's where Nietzsche goes next, and that's where things stop being historical and start becoming psychological. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever judged someone instantly and only later tried to justify it? Not with logic, not with evidence, but with a story your mind created after the feeling arrived. That's not a flaw. That's how the human mind works. Nietzsche understood this long before neuroscience did. He saw something disturbing. Morality is rarely the result of thinking. Thinking is usually the result of morality. Modern psychology confirms something Nietzsche suspected intuitively. When people make moral judgments, the emotion comes first and the reason comes later. Your brain reacts before you can stop it. Disgust, fear, anger, superiority, shame. And only after that reaction does your mind say, okay, why do I feel this way? Then it builds a story, a justification, a moral argument. Nietzsche would say, you don't discover moral truth, you defend emotional reactions. Think about how often morality is described using bodily language. That's disgusting. That makes me sick. That feels wrong. That leaves a bad taste. Those aren't metaphors by accident. Neuroscience shows that moral disgust activates the same brain regions as physical disgust. The brain doesn't clearly separate spoiled food, disease, contamination from taboo behavior, social violations, moral impurity. To the brain, they feel similar. Nietzsche saw this and thought, what if morality evolved not to tell us what's true, but to keep the group safe? Early humans didn't have time for philosophical debate. If something threatened the tribe, it had to feel wrong immediately. Slow thinkers died. Fast judges survived. So morality became a shortcut. Good equals safe for the group. Evil equals dangerous for the group. That means morality wasn't born from wisdom, it was born from survival pressure. Nietzsche's question was dangerous. If morality evolved to protect tribes, why do we treat it as eternal truth? Let's be honest, my friend. Moral outrage feels good. It gives clarity, identity, superiority, belonging, purpose. When you judge someone as wrong, you automatically become right. That's intoxicating. Modern research shows moral outrage releases dopamine, the same reward chemical involved in addiction. Nietzsche would smile at this and say, morality is not about goodness, it's about power over others and over yourself. The human brain hates ambiguity. Uncertainty feels dangerous, so moral rules become emotional anchors. This is good, that is evil. I know where I stand. But Nietzsche warns, certainty is comforting, not necessarily correct. Moral systems often exist to reduce anxiety, not to reflect reality. They make the world feel manageable. But what if life isn't meant to be comfortable? What if life is meant to be explored, not judged? Here's the core of this chapter. We judge because it feels safer than understanding. Judgment ends curiosity. Understanding requires vulnerability. Judgment says, I know. Understanding says, I might be wrong. And most people would rather be morally certain than intellectually honest. Nietzsche isn't asking you to abandon values. He's asking something harder. To notice where your morals come from, emotion, fear, biology, habit, before you worship them. So, my friend, next time you feel moral outrage rising in your chest, pause. Ask yourself, did I think this or did I feel it first? And then ask the more dangerous question. What would happen if I understood this instead of condemning it? This is where philosophy stops being theory and starts becoming personal. Let's slow this down for a moment. Before laws, before courts, before constitutions, before psychology, there was a problem humanity couldn't solve. How do you make people obey, even when no one is watching? That question changed everything, and religion was the answer. Early moral rules were fragile. Don't steal. Don't kill. Don't betray the group. But here's the issue. Humans break rules the moment fear disappears. So societies discovered something powerful. If morality comes from people, it can be argued with. But if morality comes from God, it becomes untouchable. Suddenly, rules weren't suggestions. They were cosmic commands. Break them, and you weren't just punished by society. You were punished by the universe. Think about it. A human judge can be tricked. A human leader can be bribed. A human authority can be killed. But a God? A God sees everything. A God remembers everything. A God punishes even after death. This wasn't accidental. Religion became a moral surveillance system, an invisible watcher that followed you everywhere. This was one of the most effective control systems ever created. Nietzsche noticed something disturbing. Religious morality didn't just tell people what was right. It taught them to feel guilty for being human. Desire became sin. Anger became evil. Pride became corruption. Power became immoral. Why? Because guilt makes people manageable. A guilty person doesn't rebel. A guilty person doesn't challenge authority. A guilty person looks inward instead of upward. Religion didn't just shape behavior, it shaped self-perception. People began to see themselves as flawed by default. Nietzsche's core critique. Nietzsche doesn't say religion is fake. He says something far more dangerous. He says religion reverses values. Strength becomes arrogance. Independence becomes selfishness. Self-belief becomes sin. Submission becomes virtue. Suffering becomes holiness. This is what he calls slave morality, a system built by the powerless to morally overpower the powerful, not with force, but with judgment. This is where things get uncomfortable. Nietzsche asks a forbidden question. What if God wasn't discovered, but designed? Designed to stabilize society, designed to control chaos, designed to protect the weak, designed to suppress dangerous instincts. Not evil, not good, strategic. This doesn't mean morality is meaningless. It means morality has a history, and anything with a history can be questioned. Even today, long after many gods have faded, their moral architecture remains. You feel guilt without knowing why. You feel shame without committing a crime. You suppress instincts that once ensured survival. Religion may weaken, but the moral reflexes stay. Nietzsche warns, if you don't examine where your values came from, you will live inside a moral system that was never meant for your flourishing. Maybe morality didn't descend from the heavens. Maybe it rose from fear, power, survival, and control. That doesn't make it useless. It does make it human. And if morality is human, then it can evolve. It can be challenged. It can be rewritten. It can be transcended. This is the chapter where most people get uncomfortable. And honestly, that discomfort is the point. Because Nietzsche wasn't trying to be polite. He was trying to be honest. Let me start softly. When you hear words like good and evil, you probably feel like they've always existed, like they're part of the universe itself. But Nietzsche asks a dangerous question. Who decided what good even means? And more importantly, who benefited from that decision? Nietzsche says something radical. There has never been one morality. There have always been two. He calls them master morality, slave morality. Not literal slaves and masters, but two psychological ways of valuing life. In ancient warrior cultures, early Greeks, Romans, Norse societies, good meant strength, courage, pride, power, excellence, honor. And bad didn't mean evil. It meant weak, cowardly, small, incapable. Notice something? No guilt, no shame, no moral outrage. The strong didn't need to justify themselves. They simply were. They didn't ask, is it okay to want power? They said, I want power. That is good. Now here's the turning point. What happens when you're not strong? When you're oppressed, powerless, humiliated, unable to act? You can't fight back physically. So you fight back psychologically. Nietzsche calls this resentment. Not anger you express, but anger you swallow. And that swallowed anger does something clever. It reverses values. Suddenly, strength becomes evil. Pride becomes sin. Desire becomes corruption. Power becomes oppression. And what becomes good? Humility, obedience, patience, suffering, self-denial. Not because these are noble in themselves, but because they are what the powerless can be. This is slave morality. Nietzsche is not saying, be cruel, be violent, be a tyrant. He's saying something more unsettling. What if some virtues were born from weakness, not wisdom? What if morality wasn't about truth, but about coping? Think about it. If you cannot act, you moralize inaction. If you cannot take revenge, you moralize forgiveness. If you cannot dominate, you moralize submission. What looks like goodness might sometimes be powerlessness made holy. Nietzsche asks, why was humility become sacred? Why was pride become sinful? Why did desire become dirty? Why did strength become suspicious? His answer, because humility keeps people manageable, because guilt keeps people obedient, because self-denial keeps people quiet. And religion, especially moral religion, was the perfect structure to spread this. Not evil religion, not fake religion, but useful religion. A system that tells the weak, suffering makes you good. Obedience makes you pure. Power is corrupt. Desire is dangerous. That's not morality. That's psychological survival strategy. Now let's bring this forward. You don't need ancient priests anymore. Today, slave morality wears modern clothes. Moral outrage online, public shaming, virtue signaling, cancel culture, moral superiority without action. Notice the pattern? Attack those who stand out. Distrust those who succeed. Moralize weakness. Punish difference. Nietzsche would say, resentment has learned to tweet. And instead of asking, why do I feel powerless? People ask, who can I label as evil today? My friend, Nietzsche never tells you which morality to choose. He leaves you with a mirror. He asks, are your values chosen or inherited? Do you call something wrong because it is harmful or because it threatens you? Do you admire humility because it's wise or because it keeps you safe? Is your morality an expression of strength or a coping mechanism for fear? That question alone can change a life. Nietzsche doesn't want monsters. He wants honest humans. Humans who can say, this is what I value, and I take responsibility for it. Not, this is good because everyone says so. Because morality without awareness is just tradition wearing a halo. And sometimes, the most moral thing you can do is question your own goodness. The emotion that doesn't explode, it waits. Nietzsche believed resentment is the hidden fuel behind much of what we call morality. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. Imagine someone who feels powerless. They're insulted, but say nothing. They're humiliated, but swallow it. They're defeated, but cannot strike back. The emotion doesn't disappear, it ferments. Nietzsche calls this ressentiment, a slow internal poisoning. The person cannot change their situation, so they change the meaning of the situation. Instead of saying, "I am weak," they say, "I am morally superior." Instead of, "I lost," they say, "I am good and they are evil." Do you see the shift? Powerlessness is transformed into judgment. Nietzsche makes a dangerous claim. Some moral systems were not created to improve humanity. They were created to punish strength. When you cannot overpower someone, you redefine their power as immoral. Strength becomes cruel. Confidence becomes arrogance. Desire becomes sin. Success becomes greed. And suddenly, you don't need to win. You just need to condemn. How convenient is that? Resentment doesn't just hurt. It feels good. There is pleasure in saying, "At least I'm better than them." Nietzsche noticed this long before modern psychology did. Today, neuroscience confirms it. Moral outrage activates reward circuits in the brain. Judging others gives a dopamine hit. You feel righteous, pure, elevated, without changing your life at all. My friend, morality can become emotional comfort food. Resentment rarely looks angry. It looks polite, concerned, moral, disappointed. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. I'm only saying this because I care. I'm standing up for what's right. Nietzsche would smile at that. Because resentment hates direct confrontation. It prefers gossip, moral shaming, public judgment, virtue signaling, silent superiority. It never risks itself. It attacks from behind values. Social media outrage cycles, cancel culture, moral pylons, public shaming disguised as justice. Nietzsche predicted this, not because people became worse, but because resentment found new tools. Now, anyone can feel powerful without being strong. Anyone can punish without courage. Anyone can destroy reputations while calling it ethics. Scary, isn't it? Nietzsche is not saying morality is fake or anything goes. He's asking a sharper question. Where did this moral judgment come from? Strength or resentment? Creation or revenge? Life or fear? Because morality born from resentment does not make humans better. It makes them smaller. It traps them in reaction, not creation. Ask yourself honestly, do I judge things I secretly desire? Do I condemn traits I feel I lack? Do I feel good when others are exposed or punished? Do I moralize where I feel powerless? No shame. Nietzsche believed this self-awareness is the beginning of freedom. Here it is, clean and clear. When morality becomes a substitute for action, it turns into revenge. And revenge, even moral revenge, keeps you trapped in the shadow of what you hate. Nietzsche doesn't ask you to abandon values. He asks you to ask, did I create these values, or did they create me? That question changes everything. Before you decide what is right or wrong, before you form an opinion, before you judge someone. What if your body has already decided? Because Nietzsche believed something radical for his time, something modern neuroscience is only now admitting. Thought does not come first, the body does. For thousands of years, philosophers acted as if humans were pure thinking machines. Plato said reason should rule the body. Descartes split mind and flesh. Religion treated the body as temptation and the soul as truth. But Nietzsche looked at all of this and said, no, you are not a mind inside a body. You are a body that learned how to talk. That changes everything, doesn't it? Nietzsche argued that what we call beliefs are often just instincts wearing intellectual clothes. Your temperament, your energy levels, your hormones, your health, your strength or weakness, all of these shape how the world feels to you. A strong, healthy body tends to see life as opportunity. A tired, suppressed, injured body often sees life as threat. And from that difference, entire moral systems are born. Optimism and pessimism aren't philosophies, they're physiological states. Think about this. Two people experience the same event. One calls it a challenge, the other calls it oppression. One calls it discipline, the other calls it cruelty. Nietzsche would ask, what kind of body is judging here? Is it a body full of energy or a body exhausted by history? Is it a body that feels capable or one that feels trapped? Morality, he says, often reveals how a body feels about life. Here's the wild part, my friend. Nietzsche had no MRI scans, no hormones mapped, no neuroscience. Yet, he claimed, thoughts are shadows of our instincts. Today, neuroscience agrees. Moral disgust activates ancient brain regions. Fear shapes ethical rigidity. Hormonal imbalance changes moral tolerance. Stress increases authoritarian thinking. Your brain chemistry influences what you call truth. Nietzsche saw this coming a century ago. So why did philosophy ignore biology for so long? Because admitting the body matters destroys the illusion of pure objectivity. If morality comes from the body, then no moral system is universal. That terrified religions, that threatened philosophers, that undermined authority. So the body was silenced, called sinful, called irrational, called dangerous. But the body never stopped speaking. Nietzsche flips the question completely. Instead of asking, is this moral idea true? He asks, what kind of life produced this moral idea? Does it come from abundance or scarcity, strength or fear, joy or resentment? Morality to Nietzsche is not a command from heaven. It is a symptom of how a body is surviving existence. Today, we know. Trauma changes moral perception. Hunger alters ethical decisions. Testosterone correlates with risk tolerance. Serotonin affects moral rigidity. Stress reduces empathy. Your values are not floating above your biology. They are built inside it. Here's the uncomfortable realization Nietzsche forces on us. If morality comes from the body, then judging others becomes harder. Because you're no longer judging ideas, you're judging conditions. And maybe, just maybe, what you call evil is someone else's nervous system trying to survive. Nietzsche doesn't ask you to abandon morality. He asks you to understand its roots, to stop pretending humans are pure reason, to admit that life thinks through flesh first, ideas second. Because once you see that, you stop moralizing so quickly. You start observing more deeply, and you realize morality isn't above life. Morality grows out of life. Have you ever noticed how two people can watch the same event and walk away with completely different truths? One says, that was cruel. Another says, that was necessary. One says, he was right. Another says, he was evil. Same moment, same facts, different realities. Nietzsche looks at this and says something radical. There are no facts, only interpretations. And when you hear that for the first time, it feels dangerous. We want truth to be solid, stable, independent of us. Because if truth is objective, then 1. Someone is right. 2. Someone is wrong. 3. Order exists. 4. Chaos is controlled. Certainty feels safe. But Nietzsche says this hunger for objectivity is not about truth at all. It's about fear. Fear of ambiguity, fear of responsibility, fear of admitting that we are involved in what we believe. If truth depends on perspective, then suddenly you are responsible for your beliefs, and that's terrifying. Nietzsche doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist. He means something more subtle and more unsettling. Reality exists, yes, but the moment it passes through a human mind, it becomes filtered. Through your body, your emotions, your culture, your language, your past, your instincts, your power position. You never encounter raw reality. You encounter reality as experienced by you. Even science, the thing we trust most, is built on models, frames, assumptions. Science doesn't give reality itself. It gives interpretations that work well. Nietzsche saw this before neuroscience ever existed. Here's where Nietzsche sounds almost modern. He believed that beliefs begin in the body, not the brain. Your temperament, your hormones, your energy levels, your health, your strength or weakness. All of these shape what feels true to you. A tired body interprets the world as hostile. A strong body interprets it as a challenge. A fearful body sees danger. A confident body sees opportunity. So when someone says this is the truth, Nietzsche asks, for which body? That question alone destroys moral certainty. Modern psychology quietly confirms Nietzsche. We now know about confirmation bias, negativity bias, in-group bias, availability heuristic, emotional reasoning. Your brain doesn't search for truth. It searches for coherence. It wants a story that fits who you already are. That's why facts rarely change minds. That's why arguments fail. That's why debates turn emotional. People aren't defending truth. They're defending their interpretation of reality, which feels like defending the self. Physics discovered something shocking in the 20th century. The observer affects the observed. At the quantum level, measurement itself alters reality. Nietzsche would smile at this, because philosophically, he was saying the same thing long before physics caught up. There is no view from nowhere. Every viewpoint comes from somewhere. From a body, from a history, from a position of power or powerlessness. Truth is not neutral. Have you noticed how people take disagreement personally? Because it is personal. Your beliefs are not just ideas, they're extensions of your identity. To question someone's truth feels like questioning their worth, their experiences, their survival strategies. Nietzsche says this is why truth debates become moral wars, not because people love truth, but because they fear losing themselves. Truth hurts most when it threatens who we are. Nietzsche isn't saying nothing is true, so nothing matters. He's saying something harder. Truth requires strength. Strength to live without certainty. Strength to hold multiple perspectives. Strength to question your own interpretations. Strength to admit your truth is one angle, not the whole. Weak minds demand absolute truth. Strong minds can live with ambiguity. That's the real test. So, my friend, when you say this is the truth, maybe ask yourself quietly, where is this coming from in me? What does my body want this to be true? What fear would collapse if this belief collapsed? Truth doesn't disappear when you ask these questions. It becomes honest. And honesty is far more dangerous than lies. When you judge someone, when you say they chose wrong, how sure are you that they could have chosen differently? We talk about free will like it's obvious, like it's a basic human feature. But Nietzsche looks at this idea and asks, quietly, what if free will isn't a truth, but a tool? And more specifically, a tool morality needs in order to punish. Think about it. If someone had no real choice, if their actions were shaped by biology, upbringing, trauma, instincts, environment, could you still blame them? Could you still say you deserve punishment? Without free will, moral judgment collapses. No guilt, no sin, no moral superiority, no righteous anger. So Nietzsche suggests something radical. Free will was invented so humans could justify blame. Not truth, but accountability. Look closely at how society works. We don't just punish actions, we punish intent. We ask, did they mean it? Did they know better? Were they aware? Because morality isn't about harm alone, it's about assigning guilt. And guilt requires a story. You could have acted differently. Nietzsche says this is not neutral, it's power. Because once you convince someone they are morally responsible, you can control them through shame, guilt, fear, obedience. This is how morality becomes a system of domination. Neuroscience keeps showing us things Nietzsche only suspected. Decisions happen before conscious awareness. The brain prepares action milliseconds before choice. Personality, impulse control, aggression, heavily influenced by biology. Trauma rewires behavior without permission. Hormones affect morality, risk, empathy. If your brain decides before you do, who is the you we blame? Shh, that question scares moral systems. Nietzsche would say, punishment is not about justice, it's about maintaining moral order. Public trials, public shame, moral outrage online, cancel culture, moral posturing. These are not about truth, they are rituals. Rituals that say, we are good, they are bad. And free will is the script that makes this play possible. Without it, the audience feels uneasy. Now, my friend, this is where things get personal. If your temperament wasn't chosen, your childhood wasn't chosen, your fears weren't chosen, your impulses weren't chosen, your environment wasn't chosen, then how much of you was truly free? Nietzsche isn't saying nothing matters. He's saying judging people as morally evil may be intellectually lazy. It avoids understanding, it avoids complexity, it avoids compassion. Because once you question free will, you begin to question harsh judgment, moral arrogance, superiority, hatred disguised as righteousness. You start asking, what shaped this person? What forces were at work? What am I really reacting to? And suddenly, morality becomes less about punishment and more about understanding power, biology, and psychology. If free will is not absolute, then maybe morality shouldn't be either. Maybe the goal isn't to judge harder, but to see deeper. And that terrifies systems built on blame. Because in the next chapter, Nietzsche goes even further. He asks, what if moral values don't come from reason at all, but from instinct, emotion, and the need to feel superior? What if humans are not driven mainly by happiness, not by survival, not even by morality? What if the engine underneath everything is something far more uncomfortable? Nietzsche called it the will to power. And no, this isn't about domination, cruelty, or stepping on others. That's the lazy interpretation. For a long time, thinkers believed humans were driven by pain and pleasure. Avoid pain, chase comfort, maximize happiness. But that explanation collapses the moment you look closely. Why would someone climb Mount Everest knowing it could kill them? Why would an artist starve for years just to finish one work? Why would a scientist obsess over a problem long after recognition, money, and safety are guaranteed? Why would someone destroy their own comfort just to prove something to themselves? These actions make no sense if pleasure is the goal. Nietzsche noticed this. He said humans don't just want to live, they want to expand, to test limits, to express force, to shape the world, to overcome resistance. That urge, that pressure inside you to be more, that's the will to power. Power doesn't mean ruling others. That's a crude, surface-level form. True power is self-overcoming. Think about it. A musician mastering their instrument, an athlete pushing past physical limits, a thinker questioning everything they were taught, a creator bringing something into existence that didn't exist before. None of this requires oppression. It requires intensity. The will to power is the desire to express your strength, whatever form that strength takes. Creativity, discipline, curiosity, endurance, vision. Power is not cruelty. Power is capacity. Traditional morality often treats power as suspicious. Ambition becomes greed. Confidence becomes arrogance. Strength becomes dangerous. Self-belief becomes ego. Why? Because power is uneven. Not everyone has the same drive, energy, or intensity, and when those differences appear, morality steps in to flatten them. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He believed much of morality evolved not to guide the strong, but to protect the weak from comparison. That doesn't make weakness evil, but it does mean morality is not neutral. Look at history carefully. Great artists weren't trying to be good. They were trying to be true. Great scientists weren't trying to be moral. They were obsessed with understanding. Explorers didn't cross oceans for ethics. They crossed because something inside them refused stillness. The will to power is not loud shouting. Sometimes it's quiet obsession. Sometimes it's stubborn curiosity. Sometimes it's the refusal to accept limits. And sometimes it scares people because it doesn't ask permission. Let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever felt torn between wanting peace and wanting more? Between comfort and growth? Between being accepted and being honest? That tension, that inner pressure, that's the will to power colliding with moral conditioning. Society teaches you to shrink. Nietzsche asks, what if shrinking is the sickness? Not domination, not cruelty, but self-denial. Nietzsche didn't say, become powerful and crush others. He implied something harder. If you have strength, you are responsible for how you express it. Power without awareness becomes tyranny. Power without discipline becomes chaos. Power without reflection becomes destruction. But power denied entirely, that becomes resentment. And resentment, as we saw earlier, poisons everything. What if your discomfort isn't guilt, but unused potential? What if your restlessness isn't weakness, but pressure? What if the question isn't, how do I become good, but how do I become more alive? Nietzsche would say morality should serve life, not suffocate it. And the will to power is life insisting on itself. Some of the most dangerous moments in history were created by people who believed they were good. Not evil villains, not monsters, but ordinary people, convinced they were morally right. And Nietzsche saw this coming. Nietzsche wasn't afraid of evil people. He was afraid of morally convinced people. Because when someone believes they are good, they stop questioning themselves. They don't ask, could I be wrong? Am I hurting someone? Is this belief limiting life? They say, I'm on the right side. And once you believe that, anything you do feels justified. History doesn't collapse because of bad intentions. It collapses because of righteous ones. Nietzsche warned that societies can become over-moralized. What does that mean? It means every action is judged, every thought is policed, every difference feels suspicious, every deviation is labeled dangerous. In such societies, excellence feels threatening, strength feels immoral, ambition feels selfish, originality feels offensive. Not because these things are bad, but because they disrupt moral comfort. When morality becomes too rigid, life itself starts shrinking. Nietzsche noticed something subtle. When people cannot rise, they often try to lower the ceiling. Instead of saying, I want to grow, they say, no one should stand out. Instead of saying, I envy your strength, they say, strength is dangerous. So excellence gets rebranded as arrogance, selfishness, oppression, immorality. Not because it harms people, but because it reminds others of what they are not. This is how goodness quietly becomes hostile to greatness. Nietzsche believed morality often hides fear of difference. Different values, different lifestyles, different ambitions, different minds. These unsettle people. And instead of saying, I don't understand this, society says, this is wrong. Moral language becomes a shield to avoid discomfort, to silence challenge, to preserve sameness. Difference threatens moral order because it exposes that morality was never universal. Look at history honestly. Censorship for protection, inquisitions for salvation, colonialism for civilization, forced conformity for harmony, suppression of thought for safety, all carried out by people saying, this is for your own good. Nietzsche would say, when goodness stops asking questions, it becomes tyranny. Nietzsche wasn't anti-ethics, he was anti-unexamined morality. He distrusted moral crowds because crowds crave certainty. Morality offers certainty. Certainty feels like safety. But safety is not truth, and comfort is not wisdom. A society obsessed with being good often forgets how to be honest. Here's the most unsettling part, my friend. Dangerous people don't always look cruel. Sometimes they look polite. Sometimes they look caring. Sometimes they look virtuous. What makes them dangerous is not malice, but moral blindness. Nietzsche's warning was simple but terrifying. Beware of those who no longer doubt their goodness. So ask yourself gently, do I judge too quickly? Do I confuse morality with truth? Do I silence difference in the name of goodness? Do I feel threatened by excellence? Do I feel safer when everyone agrees? Nietzsche doesn't ask you to become evil. He asks you to become awake. Because the greatest danger is not bad people. It's people who never question why they believe they are good. Have you noticed something strange across history? The people who questioned the most were rarely rewarded. They were silenced, mocked, exiled, imprisoned, killed. Not criminals, not tyrants, but thinkers. Why? Because philosophy doesn't just offer ideas, it removes foundations. And societies are built on foundations they don't want disturbed. Nietzsche understood this deeply. Truth doesn't feel neutral, It feels hostile. Because when someone questions morality, belief, or identity, they aren't attacking an opinion, they're threatening meaning. Meaning holds people together. Remove it too suddenly, and everything shakes. This is why societies don't fear lies, they fear destabilization. Let's start with Socrates. He didn't overthrow governments. He didn't raise armies. He didn't write manifestos. He asked questions. And those questions made powerful people look foolish. He exposed false certainty. He revealed ignorance disguised as wisdom. Athens called him corrupting the youth, but what he really did was corrupt comfort. So they killed him, not because he was wrong, but because he was unsettling. Fast forward. Galileo looks through a telescope and says something simple. The Earth is not the center. But that statement wasn't about astronomy. It was about authority. If the church was wrong about the cosmos, what else could it be wrong about? So Galileo wasn't attacked for science. He was attacked for destabilizing hierarchy. Truth didn't threaten faith. It threatened control. Now, Nietzsche. He didn't attack science. He didn't attack politics. He attacked morality itself. He said, "Your values are not sacred. They are human inventions." That sentence alone can collapse civilizations. If morality isn't divine, then guilt loses power, obedience weakens, authority trembles. Nietzsche didn't give people new rules. He took away the old ones. And people don't forgive that. Most people don't want truth. They want stability. Truth creates uncertainty. Uncertainty creates anxiety. Anxiety threatens order. So societies do this instead. They moralize disagreement, label thinkers as dangerous, reduce complex ideas to insults, protect comfort narratives. It's easier to silence the thinker than to rethink the system. Thinkers are rarely seen as kind. They don't reassure. They don't simplify. They don't protect feelings. They ask, why do you believe this? Who benefits from this morality? What are you avoiding? What would happen if this wasn't true? That feels cruel, but cruelty is often just clarity without anesthesia. Nietzsche knew this. One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Chaos terrifies orderly minds. My friend, philosophy has a price. If you think deeply, you may lose belonging. You may be misunderstood. You may feel isolated. You may become uncomfortable in crowds. You may stop fitting into moral scripts. But you gain something else: intellectual sovereignty. You stop outsourcing your values. You stop borrowing certainty. You stop needing approval to think. And that is dangerous to systems built on obedience. Nietzsche wasn't telling everyone to rebel. He was warning thinkers. If you see too clearly, you will stand alone. Wisdom doesn't make you popular. It makes you free. And freedom has never been welcomed by comfortable societies. Something strange has been happening over the last century. Not loudly, not dramatically, no revolutions in the streets. But slowly, quietly, science has been pulling the ground out from under morality itself. Not attacking it, not mocking it, just ignoring it. And that might be the most dangerous thing of all. For most of history, morality lived in the realm of judgment. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. Punish the bad, reward the good. Simple, comforting. But modern science doesn't ask, is this right or wrong? It asks, why does this happen? And that single shift changes everything. Let's start with genetics. There's no gene for goodness, no chromosome for evil. Instead, there are traits, impulsivity, aggression, risk-taking, empathy, fear sensitivity, dominance, cooperation. Whether a trait is good or bad depends entirely on context. Aggression in war is called heroism. Aggression in peace is called crime. Empathy in a stable society is virtue. Too much empathy in a ruthless environment is vulnerability. Science doesn't moralize traits. It studies strategies for survival. Morality comes later, as a story we tell ourselves. Modern psychology adds another crack. We now know childhood shapes personality. Trauma rewires the nervous system. Stress narrows moral judgment. Scarcity increases aggression. Humiliation breeds resentment. If a person reacts before they think, how free was their choice? If behavior emerges from conditioning, how fair is moral blame? Science doesn't say no responsibility, but it quietly asks, how responsible really? This is where morality gets uncomfortable. Brain scans show decisions forming milliseconds before conscious awareness. Your brain leans toward an action, and then your mind takes credit. What does that mean for free will? If the brain initiates behavior before the self arrives, then moral judgment becomes complicated. Punishment starts to look less like justice and more like ritual, a way to reassure society that someone is in control. Here's the tension, my friend. Society needs morality to function, but science keeps revealing how fragile it is. We still punish criminals, not because science proves they freely chose evil, but because punishment deters others, satisfies social anger, restores a sense of order, and reinforces moral narratives. Punishment becomes symbolic, a way to say, this is not us. Nietzsche would smile here. Morality isn't truth, it's boundary drawing. Science doesn't give villains, it gives explanations. And explanations dissolve outrage. That terrifies moral systems built on blame. If behavior is influenced, if choice is constrained, if morality is contextual, then the old categories collapse. Good versus evil, pure versus corrupt, deserving versus undeserving. This is why science causes ethical panic. Because when morality loses certainty, power loses its favorite tool. Let's be clear. Nietzsche wasn't saying nothing matters. He was saying stop pretending morality is eternal. Modern science supports him more than ever. Morality isn't written into the universe, it's written into human survival strategies. And when those strategies change, morality changes with them. If science keeps explaining behavior, and morality keeps losing absolutes, then the real question becomes, do we cling to moral certainty because it's true, or because it makes us feel safe? And what happens when safety matters more than honesty? Let's talk about something Nietzsche would never treat gently. Love. Not the poetic version, not the Instagram version, not the soulmate version, but love as it actually shows up in human behavior. Because Nietzsche would say this quietly, almost dangerously. Love is one of the most moralized spaces in human life, and morality ruins it. Think about what we silently expect in relationships. You should care this way. You should sacrifice. You should stay. You should forgive. You should change. Notice something? Love quickly turns into a courtroom. Partners become judges. Feelings become evidence. Morality becomes leverage. Nietzsche would say, this isn't love. This is moral accounting. Who gives more? Who owes whom? Who is failing the role? Love becomes a contract disguised as emotion. Many people don't want love, they want security, and morality is the perfect tool to enforce it. I just want what's best for you. If you loved me, you wouldn't do that. A good partner wouldn't feel this way. Those aren't expressions of love. They are commands wearing kindness. Nietzsche would say, morality in relationships often means become predictable so I can feel safe. Love stops being about growth and becomes about containment. Why does guilt appear so often in relationships? Because morality turns love into obligation. After everything I've done for you, I sacrificed so much. You owe me loyalty. The moment love becomes debt, desire dies quietly. You're no longer choosing the person, you're paying them back. Nietzsche would say, where obligation replaces desire, resentment is already growing, and resentment never stays silent forever. We praise sacrifice and love, but Nietzsche would ask, who benefits from this praise? Because constant self-sacrifice creates imbalance. One becomes good, the other becomes guilty. One gains moral power, the other loses freedom. And soon, love isn't shared, it's managed. Love that survives only through sacrifice is already sick. Nietzsche doesn't romanticize love. He sees it as will. Two forces meeting, two desires colliding, two worlds trying to expand. Sometimes they grow together, sometimes one dominates, sometimes both shrink. And morality tries to freeze this dynamic into fixed roles. Good partner, bad partner, right way to love, wrong way to want. Nietzsche would say, love doesn't obey rules. People impose rules because they fear losing control. So what does love look like beyond good and evil? Not careless, not cruel, not selfish, but honest. Desire without guilt, boundaries without moral punishment, choice without obligation, growth without permission, separation without villainization. My friend, love beyond morality doesn't mean anything goes. It means nothing is hidden behind righteousness. No pretending to be good, no weaponizing virtue, no emotional manipulation disguised as ethics. Just two people choosing each other again and again, or choosing to leave without turning it into a moral war. Here's the thought Nietzsche leaves you with. The most loving relationships are not the most moral ones. They are the most honest ones. Love doesn't need judges. It needs courage. Courage to want. Courage to admit when desire fades. Courage to stop using goodness as a mask for fear. Because when morality enters love too deeply, love quietly exits. Have you ever noticed that morality is loudest when there is someone to hate? Listen carefully to the world around you. Every age, every culture, every movement needs an enemy. Not because the enemy is always real, but because unity feels stronger when it's built against something. Long before laws, before nations, before religions, tribes survived by knowing one thing clearly: who belongs and who doesn't. If you had a common enemy, you had a common identity. Fear bonded people faster than love ever could. This is where morality quietly steps in. Good becomes us. Evil becomes them. Simple, powerful, dangerous. Morality feels strongest when it has someone to condemn. If there is no villain, people turn restless. They start searching. Someone must be wrong. Someone must be guilty. Someone must be punished. Because without an enemy, the group has to look inward. And that is terrifying. Ancient societies understood this instinctively. When crops failed, when disease spread, when chaos arrived, they didn't ask why, they asked who. A witch, a heretic, an outsider, a minority, a dissenter. Blame feels better than uncertainty. Blame feels like control. You might think we've evolved, but look closer, my friend. Public shaming, cancel culture, moral pylons, online outrage. Different costumes, same ritual. Today's bonfire is digital. Today's stones are tweets. Today's crowd still feels righteous. Notice how good it feels to be on the right side. Morality becomes entertainment. Outrage becomes bonding. Condemnation becomes identity. Here's the paradox Nietzsche exposes. People commit their worst acts when they believe they are morally right. Not villains, not monsters. Ordinary people convinced they are protecting goodness. History's darkest chapters were written by people who said, "This is necessary. This is for the greater good. This is justice." Evil rarely sees itself as evil. Moral outrage does something powerful to the brain. It gives certainty, superiority, belonging, and emotional release. You don't have to improve yourself if you can condemn someone else. You don't have to grow if you can point. Judgment is cheaper than transformation. Nietzsche wasn't defending cruelty. He was warning us. A society obsessed with morality will eventually devour its own thinkers, its innovators, its difference. Because difference threatens unity, and unity needs enemies. My friend, when a society runs out of villains, it starts inventing them. So before you join the next moral outrage, before you rush to condemn, before you feel righteous anger rise, ask yourself, softly, am I defending truth or feeding my need for an enemy? Because the line between justice and moral violence is thinner than we like to admit. Sometimes the most ethical act is refusing to hate on command. Have you noticed something strange throughout history? The people who changed the world were almost never considered good people in their own time. They were called dangerous, immoral, arrogant, corrupting, mad. And Nietzsche would smile at that, because creativity in its raw form doesn't ask permission from morality. Let's be honest, morality loves rules. Creativity breaks them. Morality says, this is how things should be done. Creativity says, why? Artists don't create by obeying moral expectations. They create by listening to something deeper than approval. This is why new ideas always feel offensive at first. Not because they are evil, but because they don't fit the existing moral order. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Highly moral societies are hostile to excellence. Why? Because excellence disrupts equality. And morality often disguises envy as virtue. When someone creates something new, a new style, a new truth, a new way of living, it exposes the limitations of everyone else. And that hurts. So morality steps in and whispers, "Who do you think you are? That's not proper. That's dangerous. That's immoral." Sometimes morality is just fear wearing a halo. Think about it. Socrates questioned morality, executed. Galileo challenged cosmic order, imprisoned. Nietzsche questioned morality itself, called insane. Van Gogh painted differently, ignored, then worshipped. Einstein rewrote reality, mocked before accepted. Notice the pattern? Creation first looks like chaos. Only later does it look like progress. Morality in the moment almost always sides with the familiar, not the true. Nietzsche divides humanity quietly here, not into good and evil, but into rule keepers and rule creators. Rule keepers feel safe inside moral systems. They preserve, protect, repeat. Rule breakers feel alive only when creating new values. They risk misunderstanding, isolation, punishment. Neither is bad, but progress never comes from preservation alone. Every leap in human history began as disobedience. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Creation requires selfishness, focus, obsession, indifference to approval. Artists ignore norms. Innovators ignore comfort. Thinkers ignore consensus. Morality asks, is this fair? Creation asks, is this alive? And those questions often clash. This is why deeply creative people are often misunderstood, accused of arrogance, or told they lack empathy. But Nietzsche would say, they're not cruel, they're listening to a different law. This is one of Nietzsche's most dangerous insights. Morality preserves the present. Creativity invents the future. If we only obeyed existing moral rules, we would still believe slavery is natural. Women shouldn't think, the earth is the center of the universe, disease is punishment, authority equals truth. Every one of those beliefs was once moral. Progress required someone to be immoral enough to question them. Nietzsche never romanticizes this. Creating beyond morality is lonely. It isolates you. It invites attack. Most people don't want new values. They want reassurance. And when you don't give reassurance, you become a threat. This is why Nietzsche didn't write for everyone. He wrote for those who feel a pressure to create, even when it costs them comfort. Have you ever silenced an idea because it felt wrong before you even understood it? Have you ever shrunk yourself to stay acceptable? Have you ever chosen comfort over creation? Nietzsche isn't asking you to become cruel. He's asking you to become honest about where your values come from. This is the chapter where most people misunderstand Nietzsche. They hear one word, Übermensch, and immediately imagine something ugly, a tyrant, a dictator, a superior race, domination. But Nietzsche wasn't dreaming of a monster. He was warning us about becoming one. Let's clear this first, quietly. Nietzsche did not imagine the future human as someone who controls the world. He imagined someone who controls themselves, someone who no longer needs approval, moral permission, inherited beliefs, borrowed values, external validation. The Übermensch is not louder than the crowd. They are no longer ruled by it. That's a very different kind of power. Nietzsche saw most of humanity living in what he called the herd, not as an insult, but as an observation. The herd asks, what do people think? What is acceptable? What is normal? What should I want? The future human asks something scarier. What do I actually value? What feels true inside me? What kind of life do I want to create? One lives by consensus, the other lives by conscience. Here's the uncomfortable truth, my friend. Freedom is terrifying. If you create your own values, you also create your own responsibility. No God to blame, no society to hide behind, no moral script to follow. Nietzsche knew this is why people cling to rules. Rules remove guilt. Rules remove doubt. Rules remove the pain of choice. The future human accepts something heavier. If my life is mine, then my failures are also mine. That level of ownership is rare. People often think Nietzsche wanted moral anarchy. He didn't. He wanted personal authorship. The future human doesn't say, nothing matters. They say, I will decide what matters. Not impulsively, not selfishly, but honestly. They don't ask, is this good or evil? They ask, does this make me stronger, clearer, more alive? That's not chaos. That's responsibility without excuses. Nietzsche wasn't predicting a new biological species. He was predicting a psychological evolution, a shift from inherited values to chosen values, from guilt to awareness, from obedience to self-discipline, from resentment to creative energy. The Übermensch is not born, they are grown, through suffering, through reflection, through rejecting comfortable lies, through enduring loneliness without becoming bitter. My friend, this evolution is internal. Nietzsche knew something most motivational books won't tell you. Most people don't want freedom, they want certainty. They want belonging, they want reassurance. The future human accepts uncertainty, isolation, misunderstanding, inner conflict. Not because they enjoy pain, but because truth costs comfort. And not everyone is willing to pay that price. Nietzsche's future human does not announce themselves. They don't preach, they don't convert, they don't dominate. They live quietly, intensely, truthfully. They create, they question, they endure, they refine themselves. They don't need the world to agree with them to feel real. That might be the most radical idea Nietzsche ever had. Nietzsche never tells you to become the Übermensch. He asks something gentler and more disturbing. Are you living by values you chose or values you inherited? And if you're honest with yourself, the answer changes everything. This might surprise you, because when people hear Friedrich Nietzsche, they imagine rage, rebellion, fire. They imagine a man smashing morality with a hammer. And when they hear Eastern philosophy, they imagine silence, monks, detachment, stillness. Two worlds that feel opposite. But shh, if you listen carefully, you'll hear something unexpected. They almost meet. Eastern philosophy begins with a quiet idea. Reality is not divided the way we think it is. Good and bad, right and wrong, pure and impure. These are mental constructions, not cosmic laws. Nietzsche says something eerily similar. There are no moral facts. Not evil facts, not good facts. Only interpretations, only perspectives. Both traditions challenge the same illusion, that the universe is morally arranged for human comfort. In Eastern thought, suffering comes from attachment to outcomes, to identities, to judgments. In Nietzsche's view, suffering comes from resentment, the inability to affirm life as it is, the need to judge it, punish it, moralize it. Different language, same wound. Both are trying to free the human mind from the prison of moral obsession, one through silence, one through confrontation. Here's where people misunderstand Nietzsche. They think he worships domination. But listen carefully. Nietzsche's ideal human is not cruel, not angry, not bitter. He despises resentment. And so does Eastern philosophy. The truly strong person in both traditions doesn't need revenge, doesn't need moral superiority, doesn't need enemies, doesn't need to prove anything. They move without hatred. That is real power. Not the power to crush, but the power to not need to crush. Now here's the tension. Eastern philosophy often says, let go of desire. Nietzsche says, affirm desire. But look deeper. Nietzsche's will to power is not craving, it's not addiction, it's not grasping. It's expression. The same way a tree grows, the same way a river flows. Not because it wants, but because it is. That's not far from Eastern naturalness at all. Both reject forced morality, both reject guilt-based living, both reject self-hatred disguised as virtue. Eastern philosophy values silence. Nietzsche valued solitude. Not escape, but clarity. Because only in silence do you hear how much of your morality is just noise. Inherited beliefs, cultural guilt, tribal outrage, borrowed righteousness. Both traditions whisper the same dangerous idea. You don't need to judge everything. And that scares society. Because judgment is control. Why Nietzsche was never a nihilist. My friend, he was closer to a liberator. Like Eastern sages, he wanted humans to live without fear of life. Without clinging, without resentment, without moral hysteria. He wanted people who could say, yes, even to suffering. Yes, even to uncertainty. Yes, even without guarantees. That's not nihilism. That's radical acceptance. Where they finally part ways. They don't fully merge. Eastern philosophy often dissolves the self. Nietzsche wanted the self forged. One dissolves identity, the other sculpts it. One seeks emptiness, the other seeks creation. But both agree on one thing. Herd morality is not enlightenment. And neither tradition exists to make you comfortable. So where do they meet, my friend? Here. A human being who is free of resentment, free of moral obsession, free of the need to judge existence. A human who moves lightly through the world, without hatred, without guilt, without false virtue. Not holy, not superior, just awake. That's not Eastern, that's not Western. That's human, beyond illusion. Maybe Nietzsche wasn't fighting morality. Maybe he was fighting noise. And maybe Eastern philosophy wasn't escaping the world. Maybe it was escaping judgment. Different paths. Same silence. By now, you might be wondering, all right, I understand Nietzsche. I see the illusion. I see how morality was built. But how do I actually live with this knowledge? Because understanding philosophy is one thing. Living it, that's the real test. And Nietzsche knew this. That's why Beyond Good and Evil was never meant to be a theory book. It was a psychological challenge. So, let's bring it into today. Not into ancient Greece, not into 19th century Europe, but into your daily life. 1. Thinking without moral panic. Most people today don't think. They react. Someone says something controversial? Outrage. Someone disagrees? Labels. Someone fails? Judgment. Nietzsche would say, this isn't morality. This is emotional reflex. Living beyond good and evil doesn't mean becoming cruel or careless. It means pausing before moral judgment. Instead of asking, is this good or evil? You ask, why does this trigger me? That one question changes everything. Because often what we call wrong is just something that threatens our identity. 2. Emotional maturity over moral superiority. Here's a hard truth, my friend. Most moral arguments today are not about values, they are about status. Who is more righteous? Who is more enlightened? Who is more correct? Nietzsche saw this coming. He warned that morality would become a performance, a way to feel superior without actually growing. Living beyond good and evil means choosing emotional maturity over moral dominance. You stop needing to prove, I'm better than you. You start asking, what actually works? What actually creates life? What actually helps me grow? That shift alone removes so much inner conflict. 3. Choosing values consciously. Nietzsche didn't want you to abandon values. He wanted you to choose them consciously. Most people inherit values like furniture, never questioning where they came from. Religion, culture, family, politics, social media. Living beyond good and evil means asking, why do I believe this? Does this value make me stronger or smaller? Does it come from fear or vitality? Does it expand life or limit it? This isn't rebellion. This is responsibility. Because once you choose your values consciously, you stop being controlled by them unconsciously. 4. Living without constant judgment. Look around. Everything today is judged instantly. People, opinions, mistakes, lives. Nietzsche would say, this constant judgment is a sign of inner fragility. Strong people don't need to judge constantly. They're too busy creating. Living beyond good and evil means letting people exist without categorizing them, allowing complexity, accepting contradiction, understanding that humans are processes, not labels. When you stop judging everything, your mind becomes quieter, and in that quiet, clarity appears. 5. Freedom comes with loneliness. Now, let me be honest with you, my friend. Living beyond good and evil is not popular. You won't always fit in. You won't always be understood. You won't always be applauded. Nietzsche knew this. He called it the loneliness of higher thinking. But here's the trade-off. You gain inner freedom. You stop living for approval. You stop fearing disagreement. You stop outsourcing your conscience to crowds. And slowly, life feels more real. Living beyond good and evil doesn't mean becoming heartless. It means becoming honest. Honest about your drives. Honest about your fears. Honest about your values. Honest about life's complexity. Maybe maturity isn't about knowing what's right. Maybe it's about holding uncertainty without panic and choosing how you live, not because you were told to, but because you understand. My friend, this is where most people stop. Not because they can't understand what Nietzsche is saying, but because they don't want to live with it. Because freedom, real freedom, comes with a cost that no one likes to talk about. Loneliness. Not the kind where you're physically alone, but the kind where your mind no longer fits comfortably inside the rooms everyone else lives in. When you stop seeing the world in simple moral labels, good people, bad people, heroes, villains, you begin to notice something unsettling. Most people don't actually want truth. They want belonging. Morality provides that belonging. It gives people shared enemies, shared outrage, shared certainty. When you step outside that, you lose something powerful, the warmth of agreement. You can no longer easily say, I'm right and they're wrong. You start saying things like, it's more complicated than that. And my friend, that sentence makes people uncomfortable. Nietzsche knew this. He knew that most people who glimpse freedom eventually walk back into the moral house they left. Not because morality is true, but because it is comfortable. Morality tells you who to hate, who to praise, what to think, how to feel, and when to feel superior. It removes ambiguity, and ambiguity is exhausting. Freedom asks you to sit with uncertainty, to live without a script, to choose your values every day instead of inheriting them. That takes strength. So most people go back, not because they're weak, but because comfort is seductive. Here's the quiet trade Nietzsche forces you to face. You can have comfort, or you can have clarity. Comfort says, I belong, I am good, they are bad. Truth says, humans are complex, motives are mixed, morality is layered, and I must take responsibility for my own values. Comfort gives you sleep. Truth keeps you awake. That's why independent thinkers often feel tired, not physically, but existentially. They're carrying their own meaning. When you stop judging reflexively, you lose the thrill of outrage. When you stop moral posturing, you lose applause. When you stop pretending certainty, you lose crowds. You might sit in conversations where everyone is furious and you're quiet, not because you don't care, but because you see too many sides. And that silence can feel isolating. This is the loneliness Nietzsche warned about. Not rejection, not exile, but distance. Distance from noise, distance from herd emotion, distance from easy belonging. Nietzsche never promised happiness. He promised honesty. He believed real strength isn't shouting truths, it's enduring them. It's being able to say, I will not outsource my thinking. I will not borrow my values. I will not hate just to belong. I will live deliberately, even if it costs me comfort. That strength is quiet, often invisible, often misunderstood, sometimes even mistaken for arrogance or coldness, but it's not. It's responsibility. And here is the line most people don't want to hear. Freedom is not for everyone. Not because people are incapable, but because most people don't want it. They want safety, structure, moral certainty, shared outrage, clear villains. And that's okay. Nietzsche wasn't trying to save everyone. He was speaking to those who feel uneasy in crowds, those who sense something is off, those who can't unsee complexity once they've seen it. If this book unsettled you, it might be because it recognized you. So, my friend, if you choose this path, beyond good and evil, know this. You may walk alone at times, but you will walk honestly. You may lose comfort, but you gain clarity. You may lose belonging, but you gain self-respect. And slowly, very slowly, you begin to feel a different kind of peace. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of not lying to yourself. Freedom is not for everyone, but if you're here, still listening, still thinking, it might be for you. And that's it for today, my friend. You were listening to Wise Alchemy. The story ends here for now, but you and I will meet again. Thank you.